Welcome to the Mindful Living Podcast. I'm your host, Athea Davis. Are you ready to become the person everyone loves, including yourself? Imagine being filled with purpose, joy, and focused energy every single day. I guide kids to gain their inner calm and adults to spark their inner child. Each week, I will give you fun, practical, and relatable, mindfully infused inspiration, insights, and information that you can directly apply in your life, family, and school or business. So, let's get started. Hey there, and welcome back to Mindful Living with me, your host, Athea Davis. You are listening to episode 62, Understanding that Emotions Are Information. And I had the opportunity to have an incredible wisdom-filled conversation with Dr. Marc Brackett. He is an emotion scientist, the expert, you guys, on all things emotions. So I'm really excited to have you listen to our conversation today because number one, I just nerd out like that to emotions. I mean, emotions govern so much of what we do, how we behave, how we think, how we view ourselves and others in the world. And particularly right now, as many of us still in quarantine under different kind of, stay-at-home orders. In some places, you may be able to get out and about. Maybe you're still not out and about. But this pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, has certainly impacted our lives in many different ways, as I've talked about on the prior podcast episodes. And one of those ways is that it's really impacted our emotional terrain. It feels like we are walking on a wild, emotional terrain landscape. I have ups, I have downs. I know you do too. I'm not alone. There are days where I feel like I've really got this. I'm creating my best new normal possible right now. And then there are days I'm thinking, what in the world is happening? What's summer going to be like? Are my kids going to go to summer camp? What are we going to do with the kids if they're not in summer camp? How are we going to make it through while I've got work? And how are we going to entertain? And oh my goodness, where's my alone time? Our schedules aren't normal. You have all the things you may be saying to yourself. It's hard. Like I said, riding the roller coaster is normal. And on the other side of that, during challenge, I know, and something I've learned and something we've learned throughout human history is that challenge presents us with opportunities to grow, to find our purpose in something, in some way in life. And as you know, and as you've been listening to Mindful Living with Athea Davis, that part of my mission on this show is to help you tuning in, to find your purpose, to find your focused energy and joy every single day. And challenges can be that spark to discovering our purpose. They can fine-tune our focus and they can elevate our joy. And that's exactly what happened with Dr. Marc Brackett. In his book, and we'll talk about this in my chat with Dr. Brackett, his book, Permission to Feel, we talk about his story about why and how he became involved in becoming an emotion scientist. And he talks about having a difficult childhood that sparked his life's work into becoming an emotion scientist, writing and studying about emotions. And I love, his story and how that hard, chaotic time in his life, that challenge, was the fuel that helped him discover his life's work. So if you're listening and you're asking yourself, what does all this mean? What is all this coronavirus stuff? Anyway, it's hard and you're so over it already. You're like, I'm in a virtual vortex. Can I just see people in my life like I normally did? You're just sitting there wondering, you're asking like, I just can't take it anymore. It's too tough, too hard. I want you to slow down, take a breath, of course, and start thinking about how perhaps this can be a growth opportunity for you, for your family, for your students, for those that you're teaching, leading, and serving. And understanding, that, our emotional landscape is a big part of the process of discovering our purpose, of fine tuning our focus, of elevating our joy. And it's not easy, right? Like I've already said that it's not easy. It takes time, and there's skills, emotion, understanding how emotions are information, and it's a skill that we can learn, any of us can learn. And so I'm going to give a formal intro to Dr. Marc Brackett before we dive into my conversation with him, and I'm excited for you to learn some emotion skills that will help you navigate this wild emotional terrain that we're all navigating together. All right, Marc Brackett is the founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center at Yale University. His research focuses on the role of emotions and emotional intelligence in learning, decision making, creativity, relationships, health, in both academic and workplace performance. Marc is the lead developer of Ruler, a pre-K to high school evidence-based whole school approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by over 2,000 schools across the United States and in other countries. He has published 125 scholarly articles, received numerous awards, and is on the board of directors for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, otherwise known as CASEL. Marc consults regularly with corporations like Facebook, Microsoft, and Google on integrating emotional intelligence principles into employee training and product design, and is co-founder of the OG Life Lab, a featured or a digital emotional intelligence learning system for businesses. His research has been featured in popular media outlets such as the New York Times, Good Morning America, and The Today Show. Marc is the author of Permission to Feel: Unlocking the Power of Emotions to Help Our Kids, Ourselves, and Our Society Thrive. And that's exactly what I want you out there, you listening, to do. I want you to have the permission to feel, to be authentic, to be empowered by the challenges. And I want you out there thriving and unlocking your own power. All right, here we go. I hope you enjoy my chat with Dr. Marc Brackett here on episode 62 of Mindful Living with Athea Davis, Understanding that Emotions are Information. And I will see you on the other side of my chat. Enjoy. Well, I want to welcome you, Marc, to the show. Thank you for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
So, I just would love, because one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book, Permission to Feel, is when you opened it up, and that personal touch, this special person that you had in your life, your uncle. And I would love for you to give my audience, the listeners today, just a thumbnail sketch into becoming the director of the director at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. What was your path into this work? And clearly that person, your uncle, played a special role in helping you, do this work that you do today.
Sure. How many hours do we have? I'll try to do the abridged version of that. But, I had a difficult childhood from the abuse that I endured to just being bullied and, having parents that really had a difficult relationship and two older brothers who, by the time I was, a teenager, had both been gone. Um, and so I was blessed that I had this Uncle Marvin, who was a middle school teacher, who literally was developing a program, about emotional intelligence. It wasn't called that then, to support his students, in his upstate New York classroom. And when I was, really unhappy, he was the one adult who really came to me
Mm.
to provide that unconditional love and support. And so fast forward, now I'm, go to high school, things get a little bit better. I go to college. I major in psychology and Spanish and criminal justice.
Mhm.
I graduate from college. I'm still not really sure what I'm going to do with my life. Um, I'm in therapy, and this is around 1993, 94, 95. And lo and behold, this book comes out called Emotional Intelligence.
Mm.
And I read the book immediately because it just looked like right up my alley. And there were two professors, one at Yale, one at University of New Hampshire, who were cited as the scientists, who had built, the theory around what the popular book was talking about.
Right.
And then I realized, something. I think, there was a chapter on emotional literacy, and I was like, that's exactly what Uncle Marvin, right, was doing with me when I was a kid. So I pull my uncle out of retirement and I say, we've got to write a book together. I'm going to become, an expert in emotional intelligence. And you did all this in your classroom for all these years. Let's just put it together and let's write a curriculum. And we started with middle school because that's where he was an expert. And that's where I really suffered.
Mm.
Anyhow, um, you know, life goes on. We write this curriculum. I apply to go to graduate school with both these gentlemen. I got rejected at Yale for my PhD, and mostly because I didn't have test scores that were high enough, and I just didn't have the background. I wasn't one of those like stellar undergraduates who was like working in a lab and
Hmm.
ready to like show off my publications. I'd taken time off. I had worked, um, but I did get into the University of New Hampshire, and was fortunate to work with Jack Mayer, who was the other one of the co-founders. And so studied it, worked on my curriculum with my uncle on the side, and then got to Yale as a postdoc about 18 years ago now. And I thought I would be here for a couple of years as postdoc and then get a job. And then just one thing led to another, led to another. Things grew. I got more successful in terms of writing and publishing and just meeting the right people to build out Ruler, which is our approach to social and emotional learning. And I'm lucky now that I'm a full professor and the proud director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence.
Yeah, what an amazing story, starting from your childhood and finding your big why through having such a, presence of Marvin, having an Uncle Marvin in your life. I hear that, having that at least one stable person in our life, through childhood makes a massive difference. And it sounds like Uncle Marvin did that for you for sure.
Yeah, he was that individual for sure.
And here we are talking about emotions, not something we often, chat about at dinner or even a cup of coffee or anything like that. It's not something like we tend to shy away from that. And one of the things I love in one of the chapters in your book, you call emotions, you say emotions are information. And there's a quote you have in there that from Plato, all learning has an emotional base. And so I want to
Hmm.
dive into that really more specifically. What is it that emotions tell us? Because I really want people to understand, because like I said, I think most of us are like, I don't want to really go there. I'm not so comfortable talking about that. Everything's good. I'm fine. So what do emotions tell us?
Well, as I write in my book, it's a big part of why I wrote the book was to communicate to people, to convince people finally take emotions seriously. And so what I assert is that emotions matter for five important reasons. The first is attention, memory, learning.
Mm,
That how we feel drives our attentional capacity. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you
right.
were bored with me on this podcast, you'd be doodling, or you'd say something like, what, it's a wrap, Mark. I think we got enough.
Yeah.
People who are listening, right? If they're not engaged, their brains are gonna tell them to do something else. So it's our feeling states, right, that drive whether we pay attention to something or not.
That's powerful.
And that goes from, you know, we attend to more details, when we're a little critical or feeling, pensive.
Hmm.
Um, and we lose sight of things, when we're very anxious. To We are riveted when we feel interested and curious. To We're open to ideas when we feel calm and content. And so it's not just that good emotions or bad emotions, which is something we like to get rid of, that idea. It's that each emotion has different properties that are helpful
Mm,
for different kinds of attentional experiences. So that's the first one. The second that we say is that emotions are behind sound decision making. So what that means is that how we feel kind of colors the way we see the world, and influences the choices we make, or the way we judge things. I always talk about a study that we did with teachers where we randomly assigned them to be in different mood states: good mood, bad mood.
Mm-hmm.
And what we then did was gave them all the same paper to evaluate. What we found was that the good mood people were more generous and lenient, and the bad mood people were, a little harsher.
Mm.
And when we asked people at the end, do you believe that how you felt had any influence over the way you evaluated the paper, most people deny it. And I think it's
Wow.
because we don't want to acknowledge, that our emotion system has control, or power over us, right? That would basically assert that we have no free will, and that's scary for people.
It is, and it's almost, and two, we've been taught, and as a culture, as a society, that we just don't get caught up in our emotions. We hide them, we zip them up. They're not part of the classroom. They're not part of, anything. You need to talk about something. Perhaps go to a counselor. Emotions stay at the door.
It's true, and it's sad, right? Because like if
Mm-hmm.
you're a parent or a teacher, if your son said to you something like, mommy, I'm feeling, really sad or disappointed, what are you going to just hang up the phone and tell them to go see a therapist?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense, right? We have to be able to attend to feelings. They are a natural part of our existence. And so it baffles me why we aren't preparing people to communicate better about their feelings, to be better listeners, and to be co-problem solvers.
Yeah, no, indeed. And it almost seems, potentially, and maybe this is a triggering word, maybe there's a better word, but it seems like potentially dangerous in some sense. Like if we're not acknowledging these emotions that drive our attention, especially, I know your example was with teachers and the research that you were doing with how they were grading papers. Okay, can you imagine? Like, I'm just thinking about all the other situations that occur in our everyday life. Kids that are
Completely, yeah.
showing up in the classroom, perhaps.
Doctors looking at charts, right?
Yeah, right. Evaluating, your health. Parents having conversations, evaluating big life decisions with their kids or partners engaged in critical conversations. Really, every single aspect of our being.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and it's almost interesting. I was saying to someone the other day, I don't know if you're, oh yeah, it was, are you familiar with the children's book series by Susan Verde, the I Am series, I Am Human, I Am
Mm-hmm.
Love? She's a great book series out, and she and I were talking, and I said, it's almost kind of strange that we're using this term permission. Like we have to have this permission to have an emotion, to feel an emotion. Can you tell us why? And it's an intriguing title, your book, Permission to Feel. Why do we need that permission?
I think that, it starts off with children because, emotions are products of our relationships. And, so for my own example, as a kid who, was being abused, um, I was told by the adult not, that I couldn't share what was happening. I had to, keep this secret, which is never healthy. Um, I had two parents who I knew loved me, but they were not very skilled with feelings, and they had their own challenges. So they weren't really prepared to deal with mine. My father, tough it up kind of guy, and my
Mhm.
mother, very anxious. So I didn't really have the permission, right, to feel, to experience,
Mm.
my emotions, or to express them, importantly enough. And and so I argue, that the adults who are raising and teaching kids, right, have to give their children, that permission to feel. And that applies to the workplace too. Most workplaces have an emotion culture, right, or climate. And, oftentimes the leaders of these organizations make choices, like, guess what? Leave your feelings at the door.
Yeah.
And so then you don't have the permission, right? You can't talk to your boss about your frustration or your anxiety because they don't care.
Right.
So I still think, my hope is that I could cross off, the word permission from my book in a decade from now. But and but still, I don't think, that we are a society that really embraces feelings as information, uh, and feelings as being important.
Yeah, and I think that runs really deep, especially I really see that particularly right now in this, post COVID-19 reality that we're living in. I'm not sure if you've experienced this, but when I've reached out to people, and even just colleagues, as a mindfulness educator within KIP, and just checking in with everybody. Here we are, transitioning virtual teaching and learning. There's a lot of emotion in that, a lot of emotion in just this new reality that we're living in. And when you reach out and you say, "How are you doing?" and you get the kind of the standard, "I'm good, I'm fine," and I've learned, like, I really have to say, "How are you really doing?" Like, I really want to hear how you're really doing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it's because we're not used to that. I think about this all the time because, like, just ask me how I'm feeling. Right? I mean,
Oh, like
you do
right
it.
now, like how
Yeah,
are you how are you feeling, Mark?
fine.
Okay, yeah,
See,
me
that's it. We're
too,
done.
right? Yeah, and that's generally the how the conversations go, right?
Let's try it again. Let's try it again.
Okay. How are you doing, Mark?
It's like this odd mixture of anxiety and despair.
Hmm.
Right? Then it's like,
Yeah.
uh-oh. And
No,
then
and
it's like,
and that just gave me the chills though, because it just felt more connecting. Like you just opened something up inside of you that, like, I could see your humanity, or not see it, but sense it. And I felt like, oh, I want to share too, like how I'm feeling, not just, I'm fine, good, I'm going to zip it up. Like, can I share my story about, all these mixed feelings I might have?
yeah. The benefit of our conversation is that you're someone who is interested in mindfulness and, has probably spent a lot of time, exploring, um, herself. And, you know, it's different, than the majority of people who, if I say that, they're like, oh no, like, what am I going to do
I
with
know.
that?
It's like a death question or something. Like, no, no.
Yeah. It's like, oy, I got to go to work, I got to teach my lesson. I don't got time for anxiety and despair. Means there's a lot of stuff to deal with and I don't got time for that. And I think that's the other piece, of permission to feel, is that we can't just like share our feelings and then we're done, right? We need love and support to work with those feelings.
Yeah, and you also talk about in your book, going back to emotions or information, that, yeah, okay, so they direct our attention. That's key if you're trying to accomplish anything. Understanding to some degree your emotional state will help you, will benefit you in reaching whatever goal that you have, inside, outside the classroom, relational, whether you're a parent or you're working with a student or within your own family. And I think you also mentioned, emotions impact our health. And this is so important right now, particularly.
It certainly is. So I shared the first two a little earlier about attention and decision making, and then the other three are what you're bringing up right now, which are that emotions drive the quality of our relationships. Right? We say that emotions are signals to approach or avoid.
Mm,
So my facial expressions, my body language and vocal tone, or how I feel on the inside, right, are basically say approach, avoid, approach, avoid.
hmm.
Then the fourth, is physical and mental health. Certainly, the amount of anxiety that people are feeling, which I know from my recent research. I just did a study 2 weeks ago
Oh, wow.
with 5,000 people across the United States. And, anxiety is the number one emotion that people are feeling these days.
Mm.
And,
And it was already
prolonged,
increasing, and now I'm
I
sure it's
know,
much more.
and prolonged anxiety, right? We know that affects our immune system, especially when we don't have strategies to regulate it. And then the final piece is performance and creativity. So our study, our center does studies on creativity. And what we find is that emotions are the fuel to creativity, but
Hmm.
our emotional intelligence is what determines whether or not our creativity becomes a reality, right? So think about it. As we are um, progressing through life, we get feedback, we get annoyed, we get irritated, we get frustrated, we get overwhelmed. And if we don't have the strategies to manage the feelings associated with our goals, then oftentimes we don't achieve them.
Right. We just drop everything.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And I'm certain many hearing this, and I'm certain, both of us at some point in our life have had that experience as well. And I'm curious, is there, from your research, is there a particular emotion that most optimizes you for creativity, or is it just the simple fact of being in tune or attuned with your emotional state that is that access point for creativity?
I think what you're asking is an important question because oftentimes, earlier research showed, that it was always about being in a positive state. You
Mhm.
know, positive emotions are great for creativity. And I think that's misguided because maybe they're good for certain kinds of creativity. Positive emotions are good for brainstorming ideas.
Mhm.
Being, in a positive, happy mood, it's, you can just generate things. But that doesn't last that long. And also, what's interesting in research is that it's not our first couple of ideas that tend to be the best ones, right? It tends to be the ones that come, after really kind of mulling over and pausing and reflecting. And, for me, I find that when I'm in my yoga class or taking a walk,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, now I figured it out.
Yeah,
It's not when I'm like really trying to, get it out.
right.
Um, the other piece of this is that, let's imagine you're trying to design an elderly care center. Think about that. You might want to be in a more kind of empathic place, feeling what it feels like to be, an 85-year-old person walking through this environment. And
Mhm.
so if you're just feeling happy, you might design it in a way that may not be suitable for people who are, in a different state of life than you are or psychological place. So I think it's really about, if you're going to write a creative essay to a senator about your anger about the policies around, testing for COVID-19 in your city,
Mhm.
you probably don't want to be in a happy mood. You probably want to be in a, angry mood so you can really generate something that's
Yeah.
persuasive.
No, I love what you're saying. I love, one of the things I love about your work is that, you're accepting of all these emotional states. I think that's important. And certainly I love all things sparkle. I love all things positivity. My own experiences where in my past, I've had my former spouse took his own life several years ago. Also have an older son, and that was his father that took his own life. And so from my, emotional processing of that tragedy, I came out on the other side, like really intensely focusing on positivity and
Mm-hmm.
joy and what I like to call awesome sauce. And that
Mm-hmm.
served me well in a lot of ways. And that's how I teach when I'm with my students, working with my colleagues. And I also think that there is perhaps sometimes too much of a focus in our culture on, oh, just be positive. Like we can't have an unpleasant emotion, and that unpleasant emotion, can also serve us well. I appreciate that about your work, that all emotions have, different properties and they serve different things, different functions. And so just as important it is, to have these positive emotional experiences, it's also just as important, I think, to welcome those unpleasant emotions, because I think we really do ourselves a disservice to kind of push those away.
Well, they're real, right? We have them. My
Hmm.
goodness, when you lose someone in your life, if you don't feel grief and sadness and loneliness and all these strong emotions around the loss of a loved one, you know, there's probably something wrong, right? And
Yeah.
to be told to be positive, too soon, or that the goal is to be happy all the time, is ridiculous. It defies the human condition, personality. It
Hmm.
defies who we are as humans. So the yeah, I'm like the anti, be happy all the time guy. Maybe that's because I'm a neurotic, Jewish professor that, it's just sort of like, it's ridiculous. And there are benefits to being calm. There are benefits to
Hmm.
being sad. There are benefits to being worried and anxious. I even tell people I like to hire people who have a little bit of anxiety, right? Because they pay attention, right? They they get things done.
Right.
This is a joke. I had somebody who used to work at our center who was very calm and wanted to meditate a lot. And I'm all for that. But there was a point where I'm like, you actually have to get things done. We can't, I'm sorry, but, I cannot pay you to just sit on a cushion all day and contemplate.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
So
a
it
joke.
can be, and I love that you're saying that, because we hear anxiety and we're like, oh no, that's bad. And the truth is, like, we all have experienced some degree of anxiety. Particularly many of us are probably feeling that more now than ever. And, interestingly enough, I just learned the other day, I think Brene Brown was talking about this. I was like, oh yeah, I'm a high functioning person with anxiety. Like, especially during these times, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get this done and I've got to like win the day. And focus on all these things. So but they serve a purpose. All these different emotions serve a purpose. And you said something just a moment ago that I think is really important, particularly in the context of post COVID-19, because we were talking about when you reach out to people and you ask them, how are you doing, and it's like, I'm good, I'm fine. Or you get, hey, I'm good, my family's well, so I don't have much to complain about. But perhaps there's a lot of loss and grief underneath. I mean, for me as an educator, I definitely feel that, not being in a physical school where all that magic making occurs in the classroom on campus. I mean, yes, we have these virtual connections. And at this point, only, coming into social distancing for several weeks here, it's like I'm zoomed out already, and I'm really missing that. And with all these other things being canceled, it's heartbreaking. Yes, it's not life or death, but it's something that's part of who we are, that's not there anymore. And I think it's important that we acknowledge those feelings of loss and grief through everything that we're experiencing worldwide.
For sure. It's important.
Yeah, while I want to kind of I want to transition to your ruler method, and I
Okay.
love it. I think I love the acronym, huge acronym fan, and I want my audience to, if they are not familiar with your work, to know about it, what it is. And so I'll let you take the lead here on your ruler
Sure.
method. How do you use it? What is it? And what impact is it having in schools?
Yeah, so there's two things going on there with ruler. First, it is, the acronym that describes the 5 skills of emotional intelligence. And then it's also kind of the name of our approach to what's called social and emotional learning in schools. Um, so let me talk about the skills first. Ruler stands for recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotion. So recognizing emotion is about being aware of the feelings that I'm having, in my brain and body, and aware of the emotions that you're feeling, through analyzing facial expressions, body language, vocal tone, behavior. Um, and it's kind of when we recognize the emotions, it's not about being right or wrong right away. It's more about noticing shifts, or, you know, the person is pleasant, unpleasant. I'm feeling unpleasant or pleasant. The U in ruler has to do with understanding. So that's the causes and the consequences of emotion. Um, so anger, for example, is around injustice, and disappointment is around unmet expectations. And that's important to know because when you hear people as a parent or as a colleague or whoever, you're listening to people telling you what's happening to them. It's through understanding the causes of emotions that you get to helping them to label their feelings, which is the third skill. And then we have to get even more specific. Is it a little bit of anger or a lot of anger? So am I peeved or am I angry or am I enraged? Am I feeling content or am I ecstatic? So the R, the U, and the L of ruler are what we call the skills that help us make meaning out of our own and other people's experiences. Then there's the E and the R of ruler, which has to do with what we do with our feeling states, the strategies. So do I express or not? Do I regulate? And how do I regulate? So expressing is knowing how and when to express emotions across contexts. So the rules, for example, at home are probably different than the ones at work. Um, Other things that influence expression are your personality,
Mm-hmm.
gender influences it in many contexts, race influences it, culture, meaning, you know, the rules in South Korea are different than the rules here in New Haven, Connecticut around emotion expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the last R of ruler is the regulation of emotion. So this has to do with the strategies, that we use to, let's say, prevent unwanted emotions, to reduce the really difficult ones, to initiate ones that we think are going to be helpful to achieve a goal, maybe to maintain ones for the day that are feeling, like the right ones, and then even to enhance or boost our emotions. Questions about that? That's a lot I just
Yeah,
put out
no,
there.
I love your method. One of the letters that sticks out the most is the L in ruler. Like you said, it's the hardest one, labeling. And I'm wondering if you have like a favorite strategy or tool to help you navigate or label your emotional states. And I think to again, in this context where maybe we're feeling upset, or maybe our default is just like, I'm just angry, I'm just upset and I'm angry. And then what, for me personally, I was upset, and I'm not sure angry. I felt angry, but I was upset, that school was canceled. We had to do virtual school. I was up for the
Mm-hmm.
challenge, but I was
Sure.
upset. And it wasn't until a week into virtual teaching and learning, and I was on a Zoom call with my team, and we weren't even talking about emotions, but I just broke down in tears. And I'm just like, I don't know what's happening to me, and I was just really upset. And I love my team for that. Like we've created that space to be together in that way. And then it really hit me like, oh my gosh, I'm experiencing grief. I'm like, I feel so much loss right now that I'm not with my students. I don't feel like that magic in the same way. And so it was a process, right? Like it wasn't like I originally just knew right away, oh, I feel grief. And I've, usually with my students, I'll say, let's name it to tame it. Name the emotion to tame the emotion. And, but I didn't sense that grief right away. So I'm just curious, like in your own practice or what you've experienced in your research and feedback, is there a process we can do to really be able to name it?
There is, and that's where mindfulness actually becomes quite helpful because it's where you have to pause
I was
and
hoping you would say that.
well, like using a tool like we have called the mood meter, which is in that whole opening of my book, which is the cheat sheet for the feeling
Mm,
words. That just the pausing to think about like what's going on in my body, the pausing to think about what's my mind is saying to me right now. is really helpful, but it's not enough to get specific with your feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, the R, the U, and the L work together. That understanding piece of, why am I feeling this way? What caused me to have this feeling? Like, what
Right.
just happened? You know, um, did I get bad news, good news? Am I nervous about doing this podcast? Am I feeling, you know, apprehensive? Whatever
Mm-hmm.
it might be. So you're trying to really unpack, like, what is the story? What are you thinking about? Or what might have just happened to influence your feeling? And that, what we find, is what gives you access to labeling. And and then you have to know the words. You just got to learn the words. I didn't
Right.
have a rich vocabulary growing up. And so, I was either pissed, or depressed, or fine. But now I can, now I'm like, I don't know, I'm feeling jubilant,
Yeah.
ecstatic, or down, disappointed, devastated, hopeless, despair, or peeved, irritated, angry, enraged, livid. You know, I've got a good vocabulary. And what that means is that I can differentiate, my experiences better. And that's one of the goals, of our work.
And that's powerful too. I love your mood meter because one, it introduces all of us to an expanded emotional intelligence vocabulary. And I love the colors, super helpful too as a visual piece. And I'm just like you. When I was growing up, there was a few emotions that I'm familiar with, and many kids growing up too. Many of my students only know a few of those, like I'm happy or I'm upset, and maybe when they're teens, there's a few more, but hopefully, if they're growing up and growing, in schools with the ruler method, any schools, that have SEL programming, they're learning, a more extensive SEL, vocabulary.
That's the
And
goal. And
yeah.
that's what I hope. I mean, my fear, right, is that, so much of the work in social and emotional learning can be superficial.
Mm.
And, it's Friday Feelings Day, and, there's not evidence-based methods, to really support people, in developing,
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
say more that about that because um what have you seen where it hasn't been, more evidence based, it's been more superficial? So because I really want people, they might hear superficial and they might not know like what that specifically means, and it might be something that they're doing that's not intentional, but it's just
sure.
an unintentional thing that they might be doing in their schools and classrooms or even at home or at work.
Well, I think, a lot of us don't know what we don't know until we see it,
Yeah.
and that I didn't know what
Catch
any of this meant.
22, right? The conundrum we find ourselves in.
Hmm. So, what I've seen over the last 25 years of running around the world trying to get people to talk about their feelings and regulate them effectively is that, you know, unfortunately, schools often are places where we react to crises, meaning that, there's a kid who sadly takes their life. There is there's an experience where there's a lot of bullying, or,
Right.
whatever it could be. And, the principal or the superintendent is like, get somebody in here to talk to us about this. And
I
then
see. Hmm.
then, slowly people go back to normal, whatever that
Right.
was.
Like the one time talk,
Right,
and then
exactly.
that's it. Yeah.
I've had people say that, well, we do social emotional. I said, well, what does that mean? Oh, well, this person came and spoke. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is so much deeper than that. It's the
Yes.
assembly, it's the presentation, it's the PD session that's once every year. It's, for me, it's about schools that, you know, um, they try to do everything. Like, we do grit, we do mindfulness, we do, growth mindset, we do I statements, we do this and we do that, and we restore circles, and it's like, really, like, what's the whole logic behind all these things? And, like, how do kids know the difference? And how are teachers practicing these skills, to
Mm.
be the best role models for kids? And so that's a big concern of mine. And
Like all these different things that they're doing without a centralized approach.
Or yeah, or like developmental,
Yeah.
that, or like what's the, like for example, a lesson I've been writing about, studying, teaching emotion regulation for 25 years. And if you would see me, if you saw me this last couple of weeks in my house, you would be like, I think he should be hospitalized. Yeah, it's
Uh-oh.
like, I mean, I'm being a little, I'm joking a little bit, but not really. I've been, this has been hard,
Yeah.
and I'm not used to being at home 24/7 with my family.
Yeah.
I've been on the road for 20 years doing presentations and teaching and blah blah blah. And so like this is hard work to be at home all the time, and
With
like
each other in new ways. Yeah.
exactly. Um and also just watching the news and feeling like
Yeah.
the world's coming to an end, and
Right.
watching the stock market crash and watching this happen and people dying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard. And
Very.
so with all of, my quote unquote expertise and degrees, I'm still working at developing the skills.
Mm.
And I think that's what makes SEL so important, and also what makes it different from other things. Because once I learned 5 plus 5 equals 10 and 15 minus 3 equals 12, I got it. There's nothing that's going to not, that's going to get in the way, for the most part, of
Mm-hmm.
my ability to do that basic math. But when I'm tired, and when I'm hungry, and when I don't exercise, and when something goes wrong that day at work and I'm overwhelmed and I come home and something goes weird, I don't regulate well. And
Mm-hmm.
because it's so much harder, because it's, we call it a hot emotion system versus a cold cognitive system. And
And hot, I think you're referring to the like the amygdala being activated, right?
right, it's, yes,
Yeah.
it's a hot emotion system. It's dynamic. It's ever changing.
Yeah, when you were talking about all those variations, which are all great, they're great tools, or a sort of circle, or, you know, um, some kind of PD that's threading, some aspect of the ruler method through it, some emotional intelligence, social intelligence, mindfulness, mindset, like all of those are important, and I think like you're saying, I think it's important that educators and leaders that really want to bring SEL on their campus really understand like the difference in these offerings, because like you're saying, it's a process. It's not just a, hey, come to this PD and you're good with SEL forever. And hey, we're going to invite someone to speak, which is great. It can be a great motivator. It serves a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
but when looking at sustainable the longevity, that again, like reiterating, like this kind of work isn't an overnight fix. It's not a one-time circle check and fix. It's an ongoing process, like you shared about your own personal experience with COVID-19, where I've also shared my own personal experiences. And I do think like the more that you're sharing how you've been doing this work for a long time, the more that we share our story about that, like we give others permission to feel and share their story too, because I wonder sometimes, especially in a world where it's all so much joy and positivity, and I love that. I have an aspect about that of myself like that, but I also feel pretty balanced in the other sense that there's purpose to these other things too. Like they're telling us something when we're feeling loss and grief or anxiety, and not to push those away. So thank you, for
Sure.
sharing that. I think that's really important. So those that are listening, and you're wondering, you're like, I don't know if I should share or not share. Everybody else seems to be doing okay. I'm gonna act like I'm okay. You can be that difference and that change just by opening up about how you're handling everything out there.
Definitely. The other thing that I wanted to mention about, so ruler, the approach to SEL that we've developed at our center here at Yale,
Mm-hmm.
is preschool to high school, right? So there's there's a curriculum that goes all the way through from preschool to high school, because
Hmm.
children need to understand and learn things in different ways based on, for example, the strategies that I would work with with a 5-year-old are completely different than a 15-year-old. Think
Yeah.
about it. The self-talk strategy, versus maybe a reappraisal strategy.
Mm.
And then the other piece of it is that the adults, have to be role models. And every year is
Oh,
different for teachers, right?
yeah.
Like right now, many of our teachers are feeling completely anxious and overwhelmed. And then if they don't get support, for their
Mm.
well-being, that's an injustice, for their own health and development, and also, for kids, because we say that it's an equity issue, um, to have, for not, if you don't have a teacher who is healthy and well.
Right.
And next year it might be something else. There might be a budget cut. And the year after that, you might get like 3 students who drive you nuts. So it's like unpredictable, like
Yes.
I've had years where I've had people at the center who have been fantastic. And then somebody comes along and just like is a trigger, and I can't sleep at night because they're driving me out of my mind. Um, and so life is dynamic. And that means that we need to constantly revisit our success or not, with these skills.
So true. And I really was connecting to what you were saying, just personally, because this past year, there's been lots of amazing experiences in this work I've been doing for the past several years, and a lot of challenges, where you question, like, oh my gosh, do I know anything? And often these situations, these challenging moments, just again, like you're saying, like where we take a moment and reevaluate like what's working and what's not, and how can we, adapt this to the situation, has proved to be a really great exercise. And again, and it's a process. And when I take the challenge, when I don't give up, because I believe wholeheartedly that these tools, these SEL tools, your ruler method is the foundation to our success and anything that we do and want in life, whether it's a relationship, a goal, whatever it is, this is going to drive you in the direction or not. And so, it's those listening out there that perhaps have tried SEL or just haven't met much success. I say this because I want you. My hope is that you'll stay in the fight. To reevaluate what you're doing, like you're saying, as we grow, as we expand, and reprocess, how these emotional tools are working, for us within our classrooms, within our schools.
Mm-hmm.
I want to transition just a bit, and I know we're headed winding down our time. And one of the things I really want people listening is I want to go back to ruler, the last R on regulation.
Sure.
We've been navigating, as you and I have both talked about, in this COVID-19 pandemic, so many of us experiencing anxiety and grief and loss, or perhaps we haven't even labeled it yet, but maybe this podcast has been helpful, and they're perhaps even, for the first time thinking, oh, maybe that is what I'm feeling. I just feel off. And like you were saying about being at home, there's a lot of friction in our relationships. Kids are home, we're home, we don't have that distance that makes the heart grow fonder, as they say. What tools do we really need right now as educators, leaders, and parents to navigate this pandemic in an emotionally healthy way? And part of that is regulating it. What can you offer for
Yeah,
us?
I think, I've done a number of presentations actually over the last couple of weeks on this topic. I just did, I'm on the board of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And so I launched a series called CASEL Cares, which is a webinar series to help teachers in particular. And so I did one recently, and I call it the Big Seven. And, the first is, you know, let me think about how I want to say this, is really just managing your self-care.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of healthy sleep, healthy eating, healthy exercise, we've got to, um, those are all things that influence whether or not we regulate successfully.
Mm,
And I don't think people realize that. It's not always about like doing something or changing, your thinking. Oftentimes, it really is about um, literally managing um, your life.
right.
And so for example, exercise you know, elicits endorphins, which you know are related to being in a more positive mood. And so if you do more exercise, guess what? You're gonna have fewer, of these negative emotions, and they
Mm-hmm.
act as a buffer for them. And so anything to do with self-care, I think, is critically important. Um, the other one is something that you're probably very familiar with, obviously, is just managing your physiology.
Mm,
You've got to do the mindful breathing, so that you are, able to deactivate your nervous system. Um, Relationships, if you're in an, an abusive relationship, hopefully that doesn't happen to any of us, but it does to
right.
so many people. It puts us in that fight or flight mode all the time. So managing, our relationships and, feeling seen and heard and connected.
Yeah, and I think that one, I just want to pause here because that's so important. And I want to underscore that point about relationships because, oftentimes, because I've been through this myself, and so I really want to underscore this is that when we hear abusive relationships and we think, oh, I'm not being beaten, I'm fine, that kind of that mindset. But when people are toxic and just put you down all the time and you begin to question yourself, and then you then model that towards your kids or anyone else in your life, I mean, I think that that is abusive too. So I just, again, I wanted to underscore that because I think just from hearing others, I often find that there's a level of toxicity in relationship that perhaps they weren't aware of because they're thinking, oh, nobody's hitting me, I'm totally fine, I'll just deal with it.
Well, being ignored and neglected is a form of abuse as well.
Yes,
And
true.
so, and we all have a basic need to be seen, to be heard, for our needs to be met. And what we know from research is that children who have an adult that cares about them, as you said in the opening, right there, they have different experiences in life.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth one, gets into this idea of managing your thoughts and cognition.
Mm.
This is a big one because this is hard, because
Yeah, it
I
is.
think so many of us, like I didn't have kind words said to me as a kid.
Mm.
And I was a chubby kid. I was a little too feminine, for my neighborhood where I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so people made fun of my way of walking, or my masculinity. My nose was too big, as I thought it was back then. Now I realize that it's a symbol of my wisdom.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I've reframed it.
Yes, I love
Um,
the reframe.
and you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall, you're too short, you're too dark, you're too light, you're too masculine, you're too feminine. The list goes on. And so we're programmed so early to have negative self-views. And I always ask people, how much time have you spent on checking in with your self-talk and making sure it's helpful to your growth, or checking in with the self-talk that you use or that you help your child with? So I think that's a big one, and monitoring it and managing it and making sure that you're finding ways to not drive yourself into oblivion, because during these times, with coronavirus, we feel it's unpredictable. We think it's uncontrollable. We think it's going to last forever. And we get into oftentimes catastrophic thinking, and you've got to challenge that. Um,
So important, and you're right, it's one of the hardest ones
I
to
mean, it's based
tackle.
either on how we're programmed by as our kids, or what we're programmed by watching the news. If you watch the news all the time, every day, you're going to go nuts, period.
Yeah, no, a great tool. I practice is just, one, I only read the news. I don't ever watch it. So then that way I know I have control over what I'm consuming. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to go
It's
here and
great.
here and read what I need to know. But I'm also human, and during this pandemic, I'm like, let me go read like 25 different pieces on the same thing. And
Yeah,
so I'll
you
catch
want to be careful.
I know. And so I catch myself and like, Athea, what are you doing? You're obsessing and noticing how like it doesn't feel good. So I've done that as well. But yeah, like limit your consumption, right? Like be informed, but
Exactly,
limit your
which
consumption.
leads to this idea of managing your life smartly.
Mm,
Like having a routine, doing meaningful things you enjoy. I
yeah.
live in Connecticut, um, and in New Haven, where the university is, and I'm 10 minutes from the beach, and I never go to the beach. The last month, around just before dinner, before sunset, we oftentimes just take a ride and get out and practice our physical distance, but we get out and breathe the ocean air and just take walks, and it is really, really helpful.
I
And
love that.
the last thing I want to say around this is that we are going to fail, and we have to have a lot of self-compassion and give ourselves permission, to fail, and to forgive. And I joke that, because of my dysregulation over the last couple weeks, like my new strategy is teaching my family about the value of forgiveness.
I
Because,
love it.
it's hard.
Yeah.
And we just have to accept the fact that we're not perfect. And, if you're mean or cruel, like try to get at the heart of it so you don't kind of continue with that. But,
Yes.
it's okay to not be perfect in this space. And that's the idea of giving yourself the permission to feel and fail, and forgive.
Yeah, and I think if you're falling into one of those categories where you're like not sharing how you're not perfect, I'm wondering we're wondering about you because like you said, like we're all human. I have a teenager at home right now,
Mm-hmm.
and we've practiced forgiveness a couple of times, in the beginning of staying home while he's going to school and I'm teaching. It was a challenge. It was a challenge, and he expressed it was really hard for him. We had a heated moment, and then we're able to say let's take a break and come back and be able to talk about it. So and practice forgiveness. Like, hey, I'm sorry. I got a lot of things that I'm feeling right now, and he is too. So that's a great one. No, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
And I so we have made it to rapid fire.
Okay.
And again, like rapid fire for anyone that's listened before, or if you're new, I'm just going to run through some questions, big philosophical questions. And whatever word or phrase comes up, you just say it. No right or wrong answer. It's fun. It'll be an adventure, Mark.
All right, let's go.
Okay. What do you believe?
I believe that, I was going to say, I believe that children are the future. But
Why not?
actually, I'm going to go with that one.
Okay, I love it. No, like that was really different, and no one said that, and it so fits our conversation. So that's perfect. What are you grateful for?
I am grateful for my uncle who helped me to have purpose in life.
Yay for the Uncle Marvins out there. What sustains you?
Um, Having really solid, meaningful relationships.
Mm. And you are on Mindful Living with Athea Davis, and so I love to ask all my guests on the show, what does mindful living mean to you, Mark?
I think it means taking the middle path for almost everything.
Mm. Love it. And my last question today, I want people to read your book, to know about your work. If you're an educator or educational leader out there or a leader in a business, this work is so key to your success in all the ways. And how can people find you online, social media, by your book?
Yeah, so I think going to my website, which is Marc with a C, Marc Brackett, BRACKETT.com, is really the gateway to everything. So it has the research there. You can go to the center at Yale, you can go to Ruler, you can learn about our apps, and obviously you can learn more about my book. And yeah, so it's one stop and you can learn everything.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Marc, for your time, for your insights, for your wisdom on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey there, and welcome to the other side of my chat with Dr. Marc Brackett. Here on episode 62 of Mindful Living with Athea Davis, understanding that emotions are information. And as I said in the intro to this episode today, that difficult times in our lives, challenges, chaos, like the entire world is experiencing right now with this pandemic, or whatever personal challenges that you may have or have had or you are still struggling with, that how to really get through those challenges is not to run away from our emotional terrain. It's really to get curious, investigate it, have the skills to understand what our emotions are telling us. So once we know what they're telling us, we can do something about it. Perhaps even find our purpose in these challenging times, fine-tuning our focus and elevating our joy. Understanding our emotional terrain is the key to all three of those things, to understanding and finding purpose, to cultivating focused energy and joy. Without understanding our emotion, we can just stay stuck and keep repeating unhealthy patterns in our life. And I want you out there, as in the title of Marc Brackett's book, I want you to have the permission to feel. I think it's so important, especially if you're in a position where you're working with kids, because you then become the model for the kids you're working with on giving them the permission to feel, so they can also understand how once they, as Marc says in his title, unlock that power to be empowered by this emotional terrain, that we can really make a difference in our own lives and the lives of others, especially for those that we're teaching, leading, and serving. I know there was so much value in this episode, so much amazing information. Absolutely love Marc's book. Go get it, read it. You're going to find it like you're not going to be able to put it down. So it's great information. And I absolutely love his ruler method, and I'm excited to dive deeper into utilizing his ruler method. I mean, as a mindfulness educator, I'm always looking for tools that I can use to sharpen my own, my own skills, to put more great tools in my toolbox and refine as I, grow along this journey as well. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in here to episode 62. I would love to hear your feedback. You can DM me out there on social media. I am at Athea Davis, AtheaDavis. You can find me on all the social channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I will also link to that in the show notes. I will also link to Marc's book and how you can contact Marc in the show notes. So that will be linked there as well. And I would love for you to take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It really makes a great difference. And if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button so you're updated on all the episodes that are coming out each week just for you. And if you have any favorite episodes, please screenshot your favorite episode and share it on your favorite social media platform, and tag me at Athea Davis, like I said, on all the social platforms out there. All right. Well, that's what I have for now, for today, for this week. I hope you're staying well, you're staying healthy, you are really taking efforts to take care of yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. We need that every day of our life, but especially during times of challenge, like the world pandemic or other personal challenges that you may be experiencing. It is so key to helping you navigate that challenge in a healthy way, so you come out shining brighter on the other side. And it is possible. And I hope you heard, what's possible in Marc's story and even in my own story that I've shared here on the podcast in the prior episode, Turning Pain into Purpose. All right, dear ones out there, I hope you're shining bright in all the things that you're doing. And you know what I like to say? I hope you tune into and spread the awesome sauce sparkle here, there, and everywhere. And I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Living Podcast with me, your host, Athea Davis. Think of me as your extra sparkly, good vibes, and no-nonsense guide, reminding you to take intentional action and choose to be the person today you want to become tomorrow. The world needs your sparkle, your joy, your gifts in action. Speaking of, I have a free gift for all my podcast listeners. Go now and subscribe to my email list and get your free health and wellness guide, Awesome Sauce Insights, at soulsenseyoga.com. And take a moment to rate and review my podcast on iTunes or wherever you may find yourself listening to Mindful Living with Athea Davis. I truly appreciate your time and feedback so I can continue to deliver valuable content to each of you. Until next time, have an awesome sauce day, friends.